Hello, so today I will be going over the 3SB lesson plan template. I'm going to be using one of the social science examples. If this was for an 8th grade U.S. history class, and the title of the unit and lesson is Westward Expansion Movement Groups. Okay, so the first part of the lesson plan is the central focus of unit, and there's 3 different ones. There's the essential literacy strategy focus, and this is going to be the focus of the literacy skills that you're using to learn this particular subject or content. So even though this is a social science class, you're still using literacy skills to learn these things. The related skill is the skills that support the use of the strategy. So for this one, it was students will synthesize information from a secondary source to and demonstrate their understanding through oral presentation. And finally, the content focus is the focus that is specific to the content of the subject area that you are teaching. So this would be the purpose of the unit from a social science perspective, which is specific groups that aided in westward expansion in the United States during the mid-1800s. Okay, moving on to the standards. Again, there's 3 standards that you typically want to cover. There's the content standards, which in this case is the California Social Science Standards. And then there's the ELA standards, which again is the literacy standards that you are using to teach and learn this unit. And then finally, there's the ELD standards, and this is specifically for our EL learners. So if you have any English learning students in your classroom, you also want to make sure that you cover this standard. Okay, the instructional learning objective. This is the objective of the lesson. So this is what you want your students to be able to do by the end of the lesson. And one key thing to point out about this is that you always want this verb, so like identify, summarize, and synthesize, to be a measurable verb. So instead of just saying students will learn, you want students to, or you want to write verbs that is measurable. So they'll be able to identify, students will be able to summarize, and students will be able to synthesize. And then the assessment is how you are going to measure that learning. So how you're going to assess if the student was able to identify or summarize, so on and so forth. There's formative and summative, and then there's also informal and formal. Formative is going to be just checking for progress, checking for understanding, and this is what you're going to be using throughout the lesson. And then summative is the final check for knowledge and understanding, and this is typically something like a test at the end of the unit or something like that. There's also informal and formal. Informal is something where you can just have a student like give you a thumbs up if they understand, or just kind of a casual and verbal way of checking for understanding. Formal is when a student physically turns something in so that you can grade it, whether it's for points or not. Okay, moving on. There's the language function and demands, and there's 2 sections. There's a language function. These are the verbs, again, that your students will be using to see if they were able to learn the lesson. So these are the verbs that are the language function that students will need to complete this lesson. And these verbs are taken right out of our instructional learning objectives. And then the additional language demands, there is typically where your vocabulary goes, which are any important keywords that your students need to know in order to get this lesson. There's the discourse, which is like the type of writing that they'll be doing. So this can be something like argumentative. In this case, it's collaborative writing, written reflection, and discussion. And then there's also the syntax, which is the order of words and the grammar and things like that. Next section is the resource and materials. This is pretty straightforward. It's everything that you would need in order to complete this lesson. Student prior knowledge. So this is these are things that you want your students to know before you go into this lesson. And this is actually really important to identify because you want to make sure that you're connecting your previous lessons to this one and you're not just throwing new information at your students without them having prior knowledge to understand what you want them to learn that day. And so going off of that, the first section of the instruction is the transition from previous activity. So again, you want to kind of connect what they learned previously to what you're going to teach them today. One reason why is because students do get really motivated and excited a lot of the times when they're able to take something that they learned previously and then connect it to something new that they're learning. And also, again, especially in social science, you want them to see the chronological order of things, and you want the students to be able to connect previous ideas to new ideas that they're going to be learning. Okay, so the hook and purpose for learning. This is the beginning of the lesson when you are trying to draw your students in and get their attention. So you don't want them to just walk into your classroom and you start lecturing because nobody's going to be paying attention. You want to kind of get them excited about what they're going to be learning for the day. And also, it's really important to identify the purpose for learning, so that way students know exactly what they're supposed to be learning that day. Okay. Focused instruction. So this is the I do part of the instruction, and it's when the teacher is going to demonstrate and teach the content and skill to our students. So for this one, it's together the class will update the West map in the spiral journals. The keyword being together, so that the student and the teacher are doing it together. The teacher is able to demonstrate before just letting your students go and say, okay, figure it out. Okay, and then there's always going to be the differentiating and scaffolds for each of our sections, and this is just to differentiate and scaffolding your lesson to students who might need a little bit more help. And so there's different scaffolds for struggling students, if you have English language learning students, and also for this one's escape, but for any advanced students as well. So any students who might be ahead of the class, you want to make sure you're scaffolding for those kids as well, so that they're not just sitting there bored in class and they're actually learning new things and that you're challenging them. Okay, the guided instruction and practice. So this is the we do part. So it's how will you provide student opportunities to practice what you taught them in a supportive and collaborative learning environment. So now we're doing things together, and the students are able to practice the skills and the content that you taught them in, again, a supportive environment. So this could be something like a small group discussion, something that's very low key and low risk for the students. And let's see again, there's that differentiating and scaffolding there. And then finally, the independent practice. So this should be towards the end of your class, and this is the you do part of the lesson plan. And this is when the students will finally get to show what they have mastered and show you that they can do the thing that you taught them in class. So this could be like a group presentation, this could be a written reflection, anything where students are kind of doing independent work, again, to master what we have taught them. And finally, the closure. This can be short and simple, or it can be a longer class discussion, but it's how you're going to bring closure to this activity and the lesson, also kind of transitioning into the next activity or the next class period. So it can be something as brief as talking about what we've learned today and then going over homework for next day or something like that. So that's it. Thank you.